My name is Olivia Brown, and at 29, I never imagined a joke gift at my engagement party would become the moment that tore apart everything I thought I knew. Standing in front of our friends with my fiancé's arm wrapped tightly around my waist should have felt like the happiest night of my life. But the results that flashed across that app screen turned a celebration into a quiet kind of terror. I can still hear the laughter echoing before it turned to silence. The word matched should have meant love, not blood. The memory of that single word, 50% shared DNA, burned brighter than the candles on our cake. Now, with everyone watching us prepare for a wedding, something inside me is screaming. And none of them know it yet, but what I found out that night might unravel more than just my engagement. Before I tell you what happened when I confronted our parents about the test, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever discovered something that changed how you see someone you thought you knew inside and out. We met on a flight to Chicago. That's the short version I always tell people when they ask how we found each other. It was a red eye. I was coming back from a conference, exhausted, and he offered to switch seats so I could sit by the window. Simple, generous, charming in that quiet way that sneaks up on you. His name was Ethan Hale, and we talked through the entire flight like we'd been waiting our whole lives to meet. I remember thinking, almost embarrassingly early, I could fall in love with this man. And I did. Faster than I wanted to, deeper than I expected to, and with a certainty that scared me more than it thrilled me. He was the kind of man who remembered the name of your coworker's dog and the exact way you take your coffee even when you say you don't care. In every room, he made people feel seen, including me. When we got engaged, it felt inevitable. Not because we were rushing, but because every moment with him had been a slow confirmation. We had only been dating for a year and a half, but it was the kind of time that stretches wide, filled with road trips, shared playlists, and mornings in small cafes talking about the names we might give our kids. I'm adopted, and Ethan always asked gently, but never pried. I told him what I knew. Born in Virginia, adopted at 4 months old by Mark and Sandra Brown, raised in Milwaukee with nothing but love. No secrets, at least not that I knew of. They'd always said my biological mother was young, not ready, and wanted a closed adoption. That had been enough for me. Until that app. The test was part of a gag gift from Ethan's older sister, Caitlin. She had wrapped it up with a note that said, "Just in case your future kids want to know where they get their stubborn streak." Everyone had laughed. I'd laughed. But Caitlin had done hers the year before and said it was a blast. She'd even found some long-lost cousin who now sends her Christmas cookies. I didn't think much of it. Ethan spit into his tube the next morning. I did mine a few hours later while brushing my teeth, not even taking it seriously. We registered the kits under our real names and sent them off, thinking nothing more of it. Weeks passed. We chose a venue, tasted cakes, fought once about linen colors. I wanted cream, he liked ivory. Life felt normal. Then the email came on a Thursday morning. "Your results are ready." I was at work, trying to stay focused through back-to-back meetings, and I opened the app on a whim while reheating my lunch. At first, it was all the expected stuff: heritage, regions, some health traits. And then I scrolled down to the DNA matches section. That's where everything broke open. There it was at the top of the list. Ethan Hale, 50% shared DNA. Relationship prediction: parent/child or sibling. I stared at the screen for a full minute, convinced I had misunderstood. I closed the app, reopened it, refreshed it twice. It didn't change. The same name, the same match, the same impossible numbers. I called Ethan. He didn't pick up. I texted him something vague. "Hey, we need to talk, urgent, about the test." He responded casually, "Sure, just got out of a meeting. What's up?" But I couldn't say it over the phone. My hands were shaking so badly, I spilled coffee on my keyboard. We met at our apartment that evening. He walked in like nothing was wrong, kissed my forehead, and asked if I wanted to order Thai. I didn't answer. I was still holding the phone with the app open. "Ethan," I said, my voice thinner than I meant. "Can you open yours?" The results. He frowned, confused, but obliged. I watched him scroll. His eyebrows pulled together slowly, like he was reading something in a different language. "Is this a joke?" he asked, holding up his screen. I shook my head. "That's what mine says too." We spent the next hour in a kind of stunned paralysis. We Googled everything: false positives, glitch errors, statistical anomalies. We triple-checked names, birth dates, profiles. But there was no mistake. Ethan's parents had never adopted. Mine had. And yet here we were, engaged, deeply in love, and sharing 50% of our DNA. Either something had gone horribly wrong in the test, or something had gone very, very wrong a long time ago. The first thing we did was call our parents. We started with mine. I asked them bluntly if there was any chance, any, of a connection to the Hale family. My mom went quiet. Too quiet. "Olivia," she said after a long pause, "where is this coming from?" I told her. Every word. When I finished, I could hear her trying to keep her breathing steady. My dad came on the line. "That's not possible," he said. "Those things get it wrong all the time. There's no way." But there was something in his voice. A crack I hadn't heard before. Ethan called his own parents next. His mother sounded genuinely stunned. "No, honey. That makes no sense. You don't have any siblings. We'd know if." Her voice trailed off. Unless someone didn't tell us something." That night, we lay in bed, fully clothed, not touching. There was a coldness between us, not from anger, but from fear. What if the life we were building was rooted in something neither of us had control over? What if we were family before we were lovers? What if we were never meant to meet? The next morning, I found myself staring at the same ceiling I'd seen for 2 years, the same familiar fan blades, the same morning light, but nothing about the world felt familiar anymore. Ethan was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling silently through his phone. He didn't look back at me. He hadn't said a word since 3 a.m. I knew because I hadn't slept. Neither of us had. We were still engaged, technically. But that word, fiancé, felt like it belonged to strangers now. Something had cracked open between us, and even though neither of us wanted to say it out loud, we were both thinking the same thing. What if this ruins everything? I pulled myself out of bed, walked to the kitchen, and turned on the kettle. We needed coffee. We needed a plan. We needed something to do besides sit in that room pretending our entire lives hadn't just shifted. Ethan walked in as I was pouring milk into the mugs. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from that exhausted kind of searching, like he'd spent the night trying to make numbers lie to him and they refused. "I called a clinic," he said, voice low. "The lab that processed the tests. They said the margin of error for a 50% match is basically 0. It means what it says." He sat down at the table and stared at his mug like it held answers. "So, what do we do now?" "We ask our parents again," I said, more firmly than I felt. "And we don't let them dodge this time." We started with mine again. I dialed my mom's number, and when she answered, I didn't waste a second. "Mom, we need to talk. I need you and Dad to come clean. Did you know anything at all about the Hales before you adopted me?" There was a pause. Then her voice, brittle and defensive. "Olivia, we already told you. This is ridiculous. That test isn't gospel. People get worked up about these things, and It's not just the test. I cut in. It's your voice last night. And Dad's silence. You're hiding something. More silence. Then a sigh, not of surrender, but exhaustion. I think you should come over, she said finally. There are things we didn't expect to ever matter again. But I guess they do. I looked over at Ethan. He nodded grimly. We were both thinking it. This wasn't going to be easy. The Browns lived in a tidy house in the suburbs, the kind with a trimmed lawn and a wreath for every holiday. I had sat on that beige sofa 1,000 times growing up, but today it felt like a stage set, too perfect, too fake. My dad was already seated in the armchair when we arrived. He looked up, face drawn tight, and gestured for us to sit. We've been thinking about what you said, he began. And your mother and I. We didn't lie to you. Not exactly. But we didn't know everything either. That's the truth. What do you mean you didn't know? I asked. You adopted me. You had to have paperwork, names. My mom folded her hands. We adopted you through a private clinic in Richmond. They handled everything. Birth mother's information, medical history, the contract. But it was a closed adoption. We never knew her name, never knew who the father was. It was all sealed. The agency just said you were healthy and that your mother had relinquished rights voluntarily. That was it. I blinked. What clinic? My dad spoke up now. A place called Wexley Family Services. Doesn't exist anymore. Closed down years ago. There were rumors later about mishandled files, shady ethics. But none of that came out until after you were already home with us. I turned to Ethan. His face had gone still. That's where my mom worked, he said quietly. Everyone in the room froze. What? My mom whispered. Wexley. My mom, Stacy Hale, worked there as a nurse part-time when she was in nursing school. She used to talk about it. Said it was a mess ethically. That's why she left after a year. A thick, suffocating silence descended. I felt like I was trying to connect dots in a puzzle someone had thrown into the air. Did she ever mention anything about children? I asked, not knowing how else to phrase it. No, Ethan said. Not a word. Just that she hated the place. I stood up. We need to talk to her. Now. The Hales lived across town. Ethan called ahead, but we didn't explain why. I could hear his mother's voice through the phone. Warm, confused, unaware of what was coming. When we arrived, she hugged us both. She looked older than I remembered, maybe because I was seeing her differently now. She ushered us into their living room, same as always, and sat across from us like it was just another Sunday visit. There's something we need to ask, Ethan said gently. It's about Wexley. And Olivia. Her smile faded. What about it? You worked there, right? Around 1995. She nodded slowly. Yes, for a few months. Why? I saw Ethan glance at me. He couldn't say it. So I did. We took a DNA test. For fun. And it came back with a 50% match. I paused. Between me and Ethan. Stacy Hale's face drained of color. Her teacup rattled as she set it down. That's not possible, she said. But her voice betrayed her. She wasn't denying it. She was terrified of it. You're my mother, aren't you? I said. The words came out before I knew I was going to speak them. She covered her mouth. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Then, through tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away, she whispered, No, Olivia. I'm not your mother. I'm your aunt. Time stopped. My sister, she began, voice cracking. She was 17. Pregnant. Scared. Our parents were furious. They forced her to go to Wexley to have the baby in secret. It was a closed adoption and arranged through one of the doctors my father knew. They made her sign everything away. She looked directly at me now. Her name was Caroline. She died when you were 2.
Car accident?
She never saw you again.
And I
never knew where you went. I didn't even know your name. But I should have. God, I should have looked harder. I couldn't breathe. Ethan was stone still beside me. My entire life had just been restructured in the space of a single confession. So you're my aunt, I repeated numbly. And Ethan is my son, she said, which makes you cousins.
The room went quiet.
Nobody moved. Nobody could. I got up and walked out of the house. Ethan followed me 10 minutes later. He didn't touch me. We sat on the curb outside his childhood home, barely speaking. I don't know what to do, I said, the words raw in my throat. Neither do I, he admitted. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose you either, I whispered. But for the first time in our relationship, love didn't feel like enough. The first thing I did when we got back to our apartment was pull off my ring. Not because I didn't love Ethan anymore, but because suddenly love felt like a suspended question. It glinted on the kitchen counter, beautiful and inert, as I washed my hands again and again under the faucet, as if soap and scalding water could cleanse my bloodstream of genetic history. Ethan didn't protest. He just stood in the doorway, watching me quietly like he didn't know what he was allowed to say anymore. The silence between us had changed from heavy to fragile. We weren't broken, but we weren't whole either. We had entered a space where neither of us knew the rules. That night, I couldn't sleep. The truth was too loud. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Stacy's face again, pale and apologetic, her voice trembling as she said, she was 17. She didn't want to let you go. I didn't even know what hurt more, the fact that my birth mother had been her sister, or the fact that no one had tried to find me after she died. Ethan lay beside me, staring up at the ceiling. At some point around 3 a.m, he whispered, "Do you think this disqualifies us? Genetically, I mean." I knew what he meant. We'd both Googled it. Second cousins legal in most states. Morally murky but biologically low risk. But that wasn't really the question. The question was, could we ever unknow this? The next day, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the courthouse in Richmond, requesting any available records on Wexley Family Services. The second was to a woman named Mira Devine, an investigative genealogist a friend had mentioned years ago after finding her birth mother. She answered on the second ring, voice efficient and direct. "How old was your birth mother at the time of your adoption?" she asked before I'd even finished explaining. "And which clinic handled the paperwork?" When I told her, there was a long pause. Then, "I've dealt with Wexley before. If there's anything left, I'll find it." The next few days passed like walking underwater. Ethan and I continued coexisting, but our routines shifted in small ways. He started sleeping on the couch. I didn't ask him to, but I didn't stop him either. We spoke when we had to about groceries, work, mail. But every conversation was a detour around the one that mattered. Our wedding was still officially 3 months away. His parents kept calling. My mom left a voicemail I couldn't bring myself to listen to. The world around us carried on like it didn't know our relationship had fallen into a gray zone where nothing was certain anymore. On Friday, Mira emailed, "I found something. You're going to want to see this in person." The address she gave me was a small law office downtown. She was waiting outside, in a trench coat, holding a manila folder. She had the eyes of someone who'd spent too many years digging through forgotten secrets. Inside the office, she pulled out copies of 2 documents. One was the original adoption intake form from Wexley. The other was a memo, handwritten and yellowing at the edges. Wexley didn't just broker adoptions, she said, her voice careful. They manipulated them. Look here, this memo is from a Dr. Holcomb, dated March 1995. It mentions a Caroline Hale, 17, giving birth to a female infant. But here's the part that matters. She pointed to a line underlined in blue ink. Parental rights terminated per family request. Identity concealed from all extended relations, including minor sibling of mother, S.
Ash.
To avoid emotional complications.
S. Ash.
That was Stacy Hale, Ethan's mother. They had deliberately kept my existence hidden from her, which meant she hadn't lied. Not entirely. They never told her my name. She never knew where I went. She'd said she should have looked harder, but now I saw how deliberately they had made sure she couldn't. I pressed my fingers to my lips and breathed slowly, trying not to cry. Do you want to see a photo? Mira asked gently. I nodded. She slid across a small photo from the clinic file, Caroline in a hospital gown, holding a blanket-wrapped infant.
Me.
Her face was barely more than a girl's. She had Ethan's cheekbones. Or maybe I did. Her smile was exhausted, hollowed-out hope. There was something haunted in her eyes, like she knew she was saying goodbye before she ever had a chance to say hello. When I left the office, I didn't go home. I wandered downtown, past flower vendors and couples holding hands, past the bridal shop where I'd once tried on dresses. The mannequin in the window still wore the same satin gown I had loved. I stared at it for too long. I wondered if she, the woman I'd been 2 weeks ago, still lived somewhere inside me. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. He looked up, hesitant, like maybe I had come back to end things. I held out the folder wordlessly. He read every page. When he got to the memo, he closed his eyes. They kept you from her, he said. They kept you from me, I answered. We were quiet for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. Would it be easier if we ended this now? Before it gets harder? I shook my head. It's already hard. But that doesn't mean we stop. We decided, tentatively, to postpone the wedding. Not cancel.
Just pause. To breathe. To think.
I emailed the venue, called the florist, told my bridesmaids. The responses were kind but cautious. Everyone assumed it was cold feet. No one guessed the truth. That weekend, I visited Stacy alone. Ethan wanted to come, but I needed the conversation to be between us. She greeted me with red eyes and tissues in hand. Her house smelled like lemon cleaner and a perfume I remembered from childhood hugs. I sat on her couch, the same one I'd curled into at Christmas. You loved her, didn't you? I asked. More than I was ever allowed to show, she whispered. They made it sound like she was shaming the family. My parents, they weren't cruel, exactly. Just obsessed with image. When she got pregnant, they made all the decisions. I was 16. I thought I'd find her someday.
Or you.
I showed her the picture. She broke down. We cried together. Afterward, I asked her something that had been eating at me. If I hadn't taken that test, would you have ever known? She didn't answer right away. Then, probably not. And that breaks my heart. I left her house with a photocopy in my purse and a hollowness in my chest that felt like both grief and clarity. Back home, Ethan was cooking dinner. He wasn't a good cook, but he tried. As he stirred a pan of something halfway burnt, he said, "My mom called. She wants to meet you again. Just the two of you. She said she wants to tell you more about Caroline." "Okay," I said. I wasn't sure I wanted to know more, but I owed it to the girl in that photo. Later, we sat on the couch, not touching, but close. He looked over at me. I don't care what anyone else thinks, he said. You're still the person I love. I love you too, I said. But I don't know who I am yet. And until I do, I can't be anyone's wife. He nodded, and that hurt the most. That he understood. That he wasn't going anywhere, even if we didn't know where we were going yet. The envelope wasn't supposed to exist. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, plain, creased, and yellowed with age, wedged between a stack of catalogs and a property tax notice on Stacy Hale's front porch. She called me the moment she found it. It's from Caroline, she whispered. I could hear the tremor in her voice. It's her handwriting. Olivia, it's addressed to you. The drive to Stacy's house felt longer than it ever had before. Every red light pulsed like a countdown. My palms were slick on the wheel. I kept trying to imagine my birth mother's voice, what she might say, how it might feel to hold a part of her that wasn't filtered through anyone else's memory. Stacy met me on the porch with the envelope in her hand. She didn't say anything, just pressed it into my fingers and stepped back. I didn't open it there. Somehow, I knew I couldn't do it with anyone watching. I took it home and sat on the floor by our bed, the ring still resting untouched on the nightstand, like a placeholder for a life we hadn't decided we could return to. Ethan wasn't home. He had started taking long walks in the evenings, trying to give me space. I slid my thumb under the seal, and the paper inside crackled as I unfolded it. The letter was dated March 4th, 1995. I was just a week old. Her handwriting was careful, shaky in places, the way you write when you're crying but trying not to let it show. Dear baby girl, I don't know what name they'll give you. I don't even know if I'm allowed to hold you again before they take you. But I need you to have something for me. Something no one else can take away. You were never unwanted. That's a lie they'll tell you to make this easier for them. I wanted you more than anything. But I was 17, scared, and everyone around me said it was the only way to protect my future. What they really meant was protect theirs. If someday you find this, I want you to know you are brave. You are worthy. You are loved. Not a day will go by that I don't imagine who you became. I pray you find someone who sees you for exactly who you are. I hope you love deeply. And if you love someone who feels like home, don't let anyone tell you it's wrong.
Love.
Caroline. I don't remember how long I sat there. The words blurred until I had to close my eyes just to hold them in place. That last line clung to my ribs like a prayer sewn into my skin. If you love someone who feels like home, it didn't make everything okay. It didn't untangle the knots in my stomach when I thought about Ethan. But it gave me something I hadn't had since the test, permission to believe I hadn't come from nothing. That even if my origin was wrapped in shame and silence, it had been born in love. When Ethan came home, I showed him the letter. He read it quietly, then sat beside me on the floor. She sounds like someone I wish I'd known, he said. She was, I answered. You just didn't know you knew her. He hesitated. Then, there's something else. My mom found a box in the attic. Old papers from when she worked at Wexley. Most of it's useless, supply logs, blank forms, but there's one note. A referral list. It has Caroline's name next to a doctor's. A man named Daniel Lockridge. Why does that matter? Because Dr. Lockridge is my godfather. I stared at him. You're saying your godfather delivered me? Or signed the papers, he said. We're not sure. My mom's going to meet with him. She wants you to come. The meeting was set for the following day. Lockridge's office was in a retirement building just outside the city. A nurse led us to a small conference room. Dr. Lockridge arrived a few minutes later, walking with a cane but steady-eyed. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You look like Caroline," he said quietly. "Same eyes." I nodded. "She was my mother." He sighed and sat down. "I've carried this for 30 years," he said. "Your adoption wasn't what you think." "What does that mean?" I asked. "There were two files," he explained. "One official, one private. The Browns were the selected family, yes, but there were complications. Caroline wanted to leave a letter, maybe even meet with you someday. Her parents refused. They wanted the record clean. Wexley agreed to seal anything personal. I kept a copy of her request, but I was told to stay out of it. I regretted it for years." He pulled a photocopy from his briefcase and slid it toward me. It was a consent form and signed. Under preferred future contact, Caroline had checked yes. "She tried," he said. "She wanted you to know her." I felt something inside me tilt. A weight I hadn't known I was still carrying began to ease. But Lockridge wasn't finished. "There's one more thing. You are not supposed to be matched with Ethan. Your profiles were redacted. Names changed in the database. But DNA doesn't lie. Someone went to great lengths to keep the files disconnected." "Why?" Ethan asked. "Dr." Lockridge looked grim. "Because Wexley made a lot of money on those adoptions. They didn't want any future entanglements. Caroline's father was on the board. He ordered her records destroyed. But I kept this." He held up another paper, handwritten clinic notes with initials. C.
Ash.
Infanefa, ducto present, dela. "Someone wanted to erase the fact that Caroline ever had you," he said. "But not everyone cooperated." The room fell silent. Ethan took my hand. For the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. That night, we sat on our balcony, staring out over the dark city. The wedding was still postponed, the ring still off. But something had changed. We weren't afraid to talk anymore. "I don't want to run from this," I told him. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. But I also don't know how to move forward without breaking something else." He nodded. "I've been thinking," he said. "We were raised separately. We didn't grow up as family. Our connection, it's not what people assume." "But we share blood," I said. "And people share blood with a lot of relatives they never meet. We didn't cross a line. We discovered a line someone else buried." I looked at him. Really looked. "Do you still want to marry me?" His answer came without hesitation. I never stopped. The letter went missing 2 days after our meeting with Dr. Lockridge. I had kept it in my desk drawer, tucked between receipts and old wedding brochures I still hadn't thrown out. The letter from Caroline was the only physical piece of her I had. And when I went looking for it that Saturday morning, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain, it was gone. Ethan and I tore the apartment apart. We searched every drawer, every envelope, every inch of the closet floor. "Maybe you left it at your mom's," he offered, but even as he said it, his voice faltered. He knew I wouldn't have done that. I kept Caroline's letter like a relic. I knew where it was until I didn't. That same night, my mother called. "Sandra," I said flatly, answering on speakerphone while I folded laundry just to have something in my hands. She didn't notice the shift in tone. She never did. "We heard you and Ethan visited Stacy's godfather," she said, like she was commenting on the weather. "And that you've been digging around in old files." "I've been finding out the truth," I said. "Truth you could have told me years ago." She exhaled sharply. "Olivia, we gave you a good life. Why are you intent on throwing it into chaos over people who gave you up?" That was when I understood. She had taken it. There was no doubt in my mind. Her voice, her logic, It all pointed to a woman who believed she was protecting a version of me that had never existed. "You went through my things," I said quietly.
Silence.
Then, in a tone so composed it made my stomach turn, "You were spiraling. I thought it might be safer to keep some of those ideas."
Contained.
"Contained?" I whispered. "You stole a letter from my mother." "A letter she wrote to me." "You have a life, Olivia," she said, her voice gaining force. "A stable, respectable life. Don't destroy it chasing ghosts. You're planning to marry your cousin. Do you realize how that will look?" I didn't respond. I hung up instead. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, jaw clenched. "We should go get it," he said. "Tonight." "No," I replied, calmer than I felt. "We're not going to give her that power. She can keep the letter if it makes her feel in control." I have Caroline's words burned into my memory. Still, I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, her thinly veiled threats about image and shame and what people would say. It wasn't about my future. It was about hers. About the story she'd spent decades telling herself and others about the daughter she had saved. The reality didn't fit that narrative. The following morning, Stacy called. "I think it's time," she said. "People are going to find out, Olivia. Maybe it's better if they hear it from you first." She wasn't wrong. The DNA results had quietly synced to a public family tree. Ethan had forgotten to disable the setting. The match was now visible to anyone who shared a branch. 2 second cousins had already messaged him with confused questions. The truth was no longer ours to control. We decided to hold a small gathering. Just family. Just the ones who had a right to know or believed they did. It was Ethan's idea to do it at Stacy's house. She supported us, even when she was struggling to understand us. We invited his parents, mine, and a few extended family members who had started whispering through back channels. It felt like walking into a storm we couldn't avoid any longer. When they arrived, we were already seated in the living room, side by side. I wore jeans and a sweater that didn't feel like armor but at least offered structure. Ethan looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, but his hand never left mine. My parents were last to enter. My mother's eyes scanned the room like she was tallying potential witnesses. My father's mouth was a tight line. Stacy opened the conversation. She explained what we had learned. About Caroline. About the clinic. About the way secrets had been preserved for appearances and how, despite everyone's efforts, truth found a way to surface. Then I stood. "I know some of you think this is disgusting," I said, not sugarcoating it. "I know there's judgment. I've heard it. But the reality is, I was adopted by people who didn't know, and I fell in love with someone who didn't know. We didn't grow up together. We didn't know we shared blood until after we were engaged." A murmur spread through the room. My Aunt Darlene shifted in her seat. My cousin Jamie looked away. "But once we did know," I continued, "we didn't run. We didn't lie. We asked questions. We tried to understand where we came from."
And we're still doing that.
Together. Ethan squeezed my hand. I could feel his pulse in my palm, steady, defiant. My father was the first to speak. "You're making a mistake," he said flatly. I turned to him. "You already made one. Years ago. You told me I was chosen. But the moment I started asking real questions, you made it clear I was only accepted under certain terms. Terms I don't agree to anymore." My mother stood abruptly. "What about your future children?" she snapped. "What if there's something wrong with them? What if this decision haunts you forever?" Stacy rose too. "You don't get to weaponize biology now," she said, her voice unshakable. "You raised her to be curious and strong. Now she is, and you resent it. The argument spilled into the hall, voices rising, accusations flung. But through it all, Ethan and I stayed rooted on that couch, as if letting the chaos play out was our final test. Eventually, people began to leave. A few walked past us without a word. One cousin hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're brave." My parents left without saying goodbye. The next day, a text from my mother arrived. One line, "Don't contact us again until you come to your senses." I didn't reply. A week later, I received a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was Caroline's letter. No note. No apology. But it was enough. That same day, Ethan picked up my engagement ring from the counter and held it out to me. "We don't have to decide anything now," he said. "But I want you to know, I still want forever, even if we rebuild it from scratch." I took the ring and held it between my fingers. "Let's rebuild everything," I said. Not in spite of this, but because of it. It was the middle of September when I stood outside the crumbling brick remains of Wexley Family Services. The clinic had closed more than 20 years ago, but the building still stood, vacant, tagged with graffiti, windows like blackened eyes peering out into nothing. I had driven 5 hours alone, with Caroline's letter folded in the glove box and Ethan's voice lingering in my ears from that morning.
Take your time.
"I'll be here when you're ready." That had become our rhythm, quiet trust, the kind that doesn't need explanation. He understood this wasn't a goodbye trip. It was a burial. The grass around the building had grown wild, swallowing the lower bricks and crumbling steps. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Just standing there, wind tangled in my hair, the air thick with a scent of pine and rust, I imagined her walking out of that building with empty arms, 17 and terrified, forced to hand over a future she never got to know. I whispered her name. Not for her sake, she was long gone, but for mine. Caroline. It sounded more like a benediction than a name. I took the letter from the glove box and read it one last time. Then I folded it gently and placed it inside a small metal box I'd brought with me, alongside a photo of her and me in the hospital, the one Mira had given me. I buried it under the oak tree at the back of the lot, where the roots curved like cradling arms, and laid a small river stone on top, carved with her initials. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a place. When I got back to the car, there was a message from Ethan. "Whenever you're ready, come home." That word had changed shape for me. It no longer meant four walls or a shared last name. It meant belonging to someone who stayed, even after the shape of your past made everyone else recoil. The wedding didn't happen the way we'd planned. There was no aisle, no rows of seated guests, no ivory linens or choreographed dance. Instead, Ethan and I stood in a garden behind Stacy's house, beneath a string of white lights he'd spent the morning untangling. My dress was simple. His suit was navy. We wrote our vows that same week, honest, unsentimental, full of the kind of love that survives scrutiny. Only 12 people came. Stacy, a few of Ethan's friends, my cousin Jamie, who had apologized for staying quiet too long, and Mira, who had flown in unexpectedly with a warm hug and a gift wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a framed copy of the unfiled consent form, Caroline's final act of defiance. I didn't invite my parents. Neither did Ethan. Some absences weigh less than you expect. At the ceremony, we exchanged rings we'd chosen together from a local artisan, rings forged from mixed metals, symbolizing difference and strength braided together. After the vows, there was no cheering, just a soft chorus of clinking glasses and the sound of Stacy crying quietly into her napkin. Later that night, I found Ethan sitting on the porch swing, tie undone, barefoot. He looked at me and smiled. Not the kind you give to a camera or a crowd, but the kind you give when someone finally sees the darkest parts of you and stays anyway. You think we'll always have to explain ourselves? I asked, sitting beside him. Maybe, he said. But eventually, I think people will stop asking. Because we'll have built something too whole to question. I leaned into him. We already have. In the months that followed, we learned how to move through the world with our story stitched quietly inside us. Some people asked. Most didn't. We chose who to tell and when. It was never shame, it was protection. Of us. Of Caroline. Of the version of love we'd had to fight to define. We started volunteering at a nonprofit that supported adoptees reconnecting with their birth families. Ethan, ever the quiet observer, handled logistics. I met with women still carrying the grief of what they'd lost. I shared only what I needed to, but when I did, they listened like I was saying something they'd been waiting to hear their whole lives. Every year, on Caroline's birthday, we visited the oak tree. We brought flowers. Sometimes we left a note. It was never about mourning. It was about honoring. The kind of gratitude you carry for someone you never met but owe your entire life to. One spring evening, Stacy handed me a worn box. I kept this for her, she said. Inside were old letters, a hairbrush, a dried corsage, and a silver charm bracelet with a single pendant, a small bird in flight. She was always trying to leave, Stacy said softly. But she never had a place to land. I do, I told her. And I meant it. I don't know what people see when they look at Ethan and me now. Some see a beautiful couple. Some see a story they don't understand. But what matters is what we see, something built not in spite of truth, but because of it. A love that refused to break, even when the world told us it should. So if you've ever been told that your story is too strange, too broken, too complicated to be worth telling, remember this. Your truth might not fit someone else's mold, but that doesn't make it less worthy. Thank you for walking this path with me. I hope my story helps you trust your own voice, even when it shakes. And if it does, let me know in the comments. And hit like and subscribe so others can find the strength to write their own ending, even if it's nothing like they imagined.